Well, good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to devotionals here at Bay Presbyterian Church. Glad that you can join us. On Sunday, a couple days ago, Pastor Patrick regaled us with a fabulous sermon featuring Elijah, an extraordinary, if imperfect, prophet of Jehovah God. Well, hearing that sermon, I thought it might be fun and interesting to spend some time exploring the life and times of Elijah the prophet. So, here we go. Let's dive in. Historically, Elijah appears on the scene sometime after David was king. David's great achievement was pulling together a loosely affiliated set of tribes and make them into one single kingdom. Saul, who was the people's choice, would not be the one to achieve this. That distinction would belong to David. David had to fight to claim the throne from Saul, who did not let go of his royal position easily. Ordinarily, we think a king would lead a charmed life. Many do. Perhaps usually they do. But not so with David. Saul chased him around the countryside until Saul got his comeuppance. David had some years of peace, and during those years of peace pulled together a kingdom. And in his later years, his own son Absalom tried to usurp the throne and was killed in the process. Through it all, these loosely affiliated tribes came together and formed the nation of Israel. It was a powerful and unified country for one generation. Solomon followed David, and that they would remain their united kingdom through Solomon's reign. But when Solomon left, the nation split into two separate nations. Jeroboam, the first king of the northern expression of David and Solomon's nation. The Bible refers to this as Israel. It would later in Jesus' day come to be known as Samaria, inasmuch as its capital city was Samaria. From that time on, whenever the author of 1 Kings wanted to disparage a king of Israel, they would say, he walked in the ways of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and in his sin, which he caused Israel to commit. But when King Ahab was elevated to the throne of Samaria in Israel, 1 Kings reports that Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He considered it trivial, the Bible says, to commit the sins of Jeroboam. Did you just catch that? Jeroboam was the benchmark of evil in the land, but his successor, Ahab, thought that the sins of Jeroboam were just trivial. The days of Ahab's reign were exceedingly wicked. I know. We think in our days as being morally unhinged. I know I would neither like to be a pre-adolescent growing up or the parent of a pre-adolescent growing up. I'd be very confused living in a cultural climate that seems to me to be hopelessly decadent and untethered from any moral foundation. Such were the days of Elijah. And into the heart of this moral and spiritual ambiguity, Elijah lived, and he prophesied with Ahab as king. Now, to prophesy is to speak forth God's truth. Sometimes it is future-oriented, but often it is the prophet speaking truth into the power of the day. We're first introduced to Elijah in 1 Kings 17 as he announces in the name of Jehovah that there would be neither rain nor dew in the land until he was ready. The Apostle James tells us that it was 3 years and 6 months until he would be ready. Elijah was bold, uncompromising, and courageous, thundering away at Ahab, who had the ability and the means to put an end to Elijah's life. Well, God wanted Elijah out of the way and taken care of, so he sent Elijah to the Kerith Ravine. Actually, quite a beautiful place with ample fresh water, but some 50 to 60 miles northeast of Samaria, home of Ahab and his evil wife Jezebel, and for the most part out of reach of Ahab and Jezebel. God provided water, and ravens brought him food. I find it kind of interesting that in the list of unclean animals, the ravens found a home. And yet they would bring the food to Elijah. And this is the first takeaway, that God is even able to take the uncleanness of mankind, of his creation, and still able to accomplish his purposes. In this case, God used the unclean ravens. But in Jesus' day, God used the unclean and wickedness of betrayal, greed, and pride to accomplish his ultimate purposes, the death and simultaneous atonement at the cross of Jesus Christ. In the days of the judges, there was no king in the land, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. At this point in 1 Kings, there was a king in the land, and yet everyone still did what was right in their own eyes. The king of Israel, Ahab, was a royal joke with no moral influence or value, and God the king was ignored, and as far as we know, was unknown to the masses in the northern kingdom of Israel. Elijah had to be bold, speaking into that cultural decay. For Elijah, there was nothing but social distancing, living by himself as he was for 3.5 years, always looking over his shoulder to see if Ahab had sent his minions to whack him. Elijah, in this moment, would have been uncomfortable on his 3.5-year camping trip under the stars. Elijah would have been anxious about his future while on the lam. And Elijah would have been disconnected from humanity for a long, long time and quite lonely. And so in the midst of this, in our first discussion here of Elijah, what is Elijah's message? Elijah's message is just this: focus on the miracle of God's provision rather than the discomfort and the loneliness of the existing conditions. Certainly a message for us today in the midst of our CV-19 pandemic. Thanks for tuning in. Hope all is well with you. God bless you all. We'll see you another day.